There are some places so lonely, so quietly stubborn against the wind and time, that it seems only the toughest souls could ever call them
You
home.
brought darkness to this
Evelyn
town!
Harper's ranch was one of those places, a sprawl of open Wyoming grassland, rimmed by raw, red bluffs and tangled stands of cottonwood, a day's ride from the nearest town, and half a world from any comfort but her own resolve. At dawn, Evelyn stood in the cold, boots crunching through frost as she limped her way toward the barn, breath misting in the pale blue air. She was 43, with sun-leathered skin and iron in her gaze, the sort of woman who looked you straight in the eye and waited for you to blink. Her limp was barely noticeable most days, but some mornings it burned. Today was one of them. Still, she kept moving. There were fences to check, hay to throw, water troughs to break free from their nightly crust of ice, and a dozen wild mustangs to wrangle. Her late husband's legacy, his dream, his prison, and now, her fortress. Evelyn unlocked the barn, always double-bolted, and gave a soft whistle. A line of mustangs shuffled in their stalls, their coats shaggy against the cold, eyes dark and watchful. She moved among them with steady hands and a gentle voice, as if confiding secrets. "Easy now. You're safe," she murmured. Though who she was reassuring, horse or woman, was never quite clear. Routine was Evelyn's shield against the world. She checked her phone every hour, keeping it close even in the pocket of her old canvas coat. The doors to her cabin had heavy locks, and every window was fitted with a sturdy latch. Evelyn didn't trust strangers, not since the day her world cracked apart. But she'd learned that routine and vigilance could keep most dangers at bay. Most. Jack Taylor pulled up just as the sun crested the ridgeline, his battered pickup rattling over the cattle guard. He was big-shouldered, all denim and stubble, with a voice like gravel and a heart that never quite knew when to quit. He'd been her late husband's best friend, and after the funeral, he simply never left, showing up to mend fences, bring supplies, or sometimes just sit in silence with her on the porch, looking out at the horses. There was something steady in his presence, even when words got stuck between them like burrs. "Morning, Ev," Jack called, tipping his hat. "Morning," she answered, not pausing in her chores. He set about hauling bags of feed from his truck, glancing over as Evelyn winced, pausing to massage her ankle. "You ought to let me handle that," Jack said. Evelyn shook her head. "It's my ranch, my rules." Her voice was soft, but certain. Jack watched her a long moment, his eyes thoughtful. There was history here, more than either cared to speak aloud. Sometimes at night, Evelyn would catch Jack staring at the horizon, his jaw set, like he was weighing some confession. But then, the moment would pass. Neither pressed the other for stories they weren't ready to tell. Still, something unspoken lingered between them. Sometimes Evelyn would find Jack staring at an old photograph of her husband. She'd never known what to say when that happened. The three of them had been close once, and grief wasn't a straight line for any of them. There were wounds that hadn't healed, and truths that seemed too heavy to dig up. As the morning wore on, Evelyn and Jack worked side by side, mending a section of downed fence, tracking a skittish mare, gathering tools left in the tall grass by careless hands. They talked about weather and horses, carefully avoiding the deeper things. Overhead, a pair of hawks wheeled in the pale winter sky. Around midday, Jack fetched a thermos of coffee from his truck and handed her a cup. "Saw tracks down by the creek this morning," he said quietly. "Coyote?" Evelyn asked, but Jack shook his head. "Nope. Truck. Big tires. Mud tread. Fresh. Not mine. Not yours. He sipped his coffee, gaze darkening. Evelyn felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. She set her jaw, the old tension prickling along her spine. Probably hunters, she said. But the lie tasted sour. People didn't come out here by accident. Jack glanced at her, measuring. You keeping that phone charged? Always, she replied. There was a pause. Evelyn heard the unspoken question. Are you expecting someone? She gave nothing away. That afternoon, after Jack left, Evelyn walked the perimeter herself, slow and thorough. She found the tire tracks near the southern gate, a wide loop in the dirt just out of sight of the road. Whoever had been here had stopped, sat a while, then driven off without coming closer. But they'd been close enough to see the house, the barn, maybe even her as a silhouette in the kitchen window. Evelyn felt exposed, a bug pinned beneath the sun. She knelt and ran her hand over the tracks, her pulse thudding. No broken fences, no forced locks, yet. Still, the message was clear. Someone was watching. The sky clouded over, the air shifting. Evelyn stood, scanning the empty plains. In that moment, she realized how much her life was built on silence, on things unsaid, on secrets buried deeper than the mustang's hooves could dig. She walked back to the house, bolted every door, and checked the gun cabinet before dark. Inside, the house felt smaller. Shadows stretching long across the floor. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, phone beside her, a cup of coffee growing cold in her hand. She stared out the window, watching as dusk settled across the land. Somewhere out there, trouble was circling. But so was she, circling her own pain, her own history, holding the line. This ranch was more than home. It was the last outpost of her freedom, and she'd fight to keep it, come what may. The next morning brought a pale sunlight that did little to melt the lingering frost from the grass. Evelyn rose before dawn, her ankle already aching, a dull, deep throb she'd grown used to, but today it felt different, sharper. She pushed through the pain, feeding the horses and cleaning out stalls, keeping her movements steady and deliberate. Jack showed up just as she was struggling to lift a heavy bag of grain into the feed room. He didn't say a word at first, just watched her, arms folded, his brow furrowed. When she winced, losing her grip and sending the sack tumbling with a loud thud, he stepped forward. "Damn it, Ev, you need to let me do that," Jack said, reaching to lift the bag with ease. He glanced down at her feet, noticing the way she shifted her weight awkwardly. "I said I got it," she shot back, but her voice cracked, the pain bleeding through her bravado. Jack didn't push, just moved quietly, handling the heavier chores. In the cramped barn, the air was thick with the scent of hay and horses, but beneath it lingered something else, history, and the kind of worry that grew roots over time. Later, as they mucked out stalls together, Evelyn reached for a pail by the door. Her foot caught on the edge of a mat, and she went down hard on her side with a gasp. Jack was beside her in an instant, helping her sit up. Her jeans had ridden up just enough to expose the old knotted scar circling her ankle, a brutal ring of discolored skin, thick and ugly. Jack's face tightened. "How long's that been bothering you?" Evelyn pulled her pant leg down quickly, but the damage was done. "It's nothing, just old history." He didn't move. "Ev, I saw it before, but I didn't want to say anything." She met his gaze, jaw clenched. For a moment, the only sound was the snort of a restless mare in the stall beside them. Finally, Evelyn took a shaky breath. "You know how I got that scar, Jack?" She stared at the straw-strewn floor, voice dropping. Abel did that. Locked me up with an old shackle from the tack room. Said it'd teach me not to run my mouth. Jack's hands curled into fists. Why didn't you tell anyone? I tried. Her voice trembled, a razor edge cutting through her words. I tried so many times, but every time I thought about leaving, he'd find me. Every time I thought someone might help, they looked away. Out here, a man's word means more than a woman's pain. Jack knelt beside her, anger simmering just below the surface. You should have called me. I would have come for you, Ev. You know that, right? She nodded, wiping at her eyes with the back of her sleeve. I know, but I was scared. Scared he'd hurt you too, or anybody who tried to help. She looked at her hands, knuckles scarred and raw. I finally got out one night when he was passed out drunk, ran barefoot for miles, ended up in Laramie at a shelter. Jack sat down beside her, his presence solid and grounding. He's not coming back. You're safe here. But the words felt hollow, even as he spoke them. There was a heaviness in the air, a sense that old ghosts were stirring. The afternoon passed slowly, chores serving as a distraction. Evelyn moved stiffly, but she let Jack take on more of the work than usual. Every so often she'd catch him glancing at her ankle, worry etched deep in his face. As dusk fell, Evelyn headed out to the mailbox at the end of the long, winding drive, a daily ritual. The chill was biting, wind snapping at her coat. She reached the gate and paused. Something was wrong. Nailed to the wooden post, where only she would see it, was a tattered envelope. The paper was smeared with mud, but the letters were bold, carved deep with the tip of a knife. AF. She stared at the envelope, heart pounding. The initials, Abel Ford. She hadn't seen them in years, but the sight was enough to freeze her blood. With trembling hands, she pried it free and tore it open. Inside was a single scrap of paper, the handwriting jagged and furious. You belong to me. Come home or I'll take what's mine. AF, the words rattled in her skull like thunder. She clutched the note tight, then stumbled back toward the house, looking over her shoulder at every rustle in the brush. Inside, she locked the door and slid down against it, breath shallow and fast. When Jack came in, arms full of firewood, he stopped cold at the sight of her. Ev. What's wrong? She handed him the letter, hands shaking. Jack read it, his jaw set in stone. That bastard! Evelyn pulled herself together, voice steadier than she felt. He knows where I am, Jack. He's coming. Jack knelt in front of her, eyes fierce. He won't lay a finger on you, Evelyn. Not while I'm here. She wanted to believe him, but fear slithered through her chest like ice water. She knew Abel, knew the lengths he'd go to reclaim what he thought belonged to him. She also knew that the past wasn't just a ghost. Sometimes it came knocking, flesh and blood and vengeance. That night, Evelyn sat awake by the window, shotgun across her lap, watching the moon crawl across the sky. The ranch was silent, but she heard echoes, chains dragging across old floorboards, the sound of boots in the hallway, a voice whispering threats in the dark. She gripped the shotgun tighter. In the darkness, a plan began to form, a list of precautions, of traps and defenses she'd need to make before Abel arrived. She was scared, but more than that, she was angry. Angry that her peace was shattered, that the life she'd built from broken pieces was under threat again. But she was no longer the woman who'd run barefoot through the Wyoming night, shackled by fear. This time, she would stand her ground. Wyoming winter had a way of announcing itself. By the next morning, gray clouds rolled in over the bluffs, blotting out the sun and swallowing the open sky in a suffocating hush. Evelyn could feel the change in the air, heavy, electric, promising more than just snow. She woke with an ache in her bones and the words of Abel's letter repeating in her mind. Fear lurked beneath her skin, but stubbornness sat right beside it. She was up before dawn, checking locks and counting ammunition, each small act of preparation grounding her. She moved through the house with a quiet intensity, every sound making her flinch. Jack arrived with a duffel bag and a face that said he hadn't slept. He set the bag down on the kitchen table, rifles, a box of cartridges, a battered old radio, and a set of weatherproof cameras. "We've got to be ready, Ev," he said simply. Together they walked the property, hanging cameras under the eaves and in the trees. Jack climbed up ladders, hands numb with cold, while Evelyn watched the horizon, searching for dust trails or the gleam of headlights. The land was a living thing, vast and exposed, and she felt every inch of it pressing in around her. The mustangs clustered at the far end of the corral, snorting and stamping, their restlessness a warning. "You think he's coming?" Jack asked, his voice low. Evelyn nodded. "He's always been patient. He'll wait for the right moment, when it hurts the most." Jack loaded one of the rifles and handed it to her. "Then we'll be ready for him." They double-checked the window locks, stacked sandbags against the doors, and cleared brush away from the house so no one could approach unseen. Jack's army days showed in the way he worked, methodical, quiet, always thinking 3 steps ahead. Evelyn watched him move, grateful but also haunted. She wished for a different life, one where she didn't need to turn her home into a fortress. Midday brought a visitor, Sheriff Ed Monroe, a big man in a tan Stetson and worn badge, his squad car rumbling up the drive. He knocked gently, but there was nothing casual about the look in his eyes. "Morning, folks. Mind if I come in?" Monroe's voice was cautious, professional. Evelyn nodded, leading him inside. She poured coffee for all 3, hands shaking only a little. "Got a call this morning," Monroe began, glancing from Evelyn to Jack. "Anonymous tip. Said you were hiding something out here. Mentioned your ex-husband's name. You know anything about that?" Evelyn tensed, her hand tightening around her mug. "He left me a letter. Threatening me." Monroe raised an eyebrow. "You sure it's him?" She slid the letter across the table. Monroe read it, frowning. "That's ugly, all right. I know the type. But you know how it goes around here, Evelyn. Property disputes, domestic squabbles. Folks don't always take a woman's side, especially if there's no bruises left to show." Jack bristled. "That man's dangerous. You need to take her seriously, Ed." Monroe sighed, rubbing his temples. "I hear you, Jack. But unless he's standing on your porch with a gun, my hands are tied. I'll swing by more often, keep my eyes open." He looked at Evelyn, sympathy and skepticism warring in his face. "You see anything, anyone, call me, you understand?" Evelyn nodded, swallowing her frustration. She saw the flicker of doubt in Monroe's eyes. Out here, law was as much rumor and reputation as it was justice. She'd learned that lesson the hard way. After Monroe left, the first flakes of snow began to fall. Soft at first, then thickening as afternoon turned to dusk. The wind picked up, rattling the shutters and moaning through the eaves. Evelyn stood at the window, watching the world blur into white. The horses huddled close, nervous and stamping. Jack busied himself in the kitchen, but Evelyn drifted, memory prying open old wounds. She found herself back in that suffocating trailer in Nebraska, chained by the ankle, listening to Abel's threats as he slammed doors and broke bottles. She remembered the hiss of his voice, the smell of whiskey, the way the world shrank to a single point of fear. She'd run, barefoot, desperate, cold, scrambling through weeds and snowbanks, hands bloody from climbing barbed wire. The battered women's shelter in Laramie had taken her in, no questions asked, bandaging her wounds and giving her a cot in a cramped, noisy room. The other women had been kind but broken, trading stories in hushed tones. She'd stayed there for months, learning to live without flinching at every sound. Jack's voice broke the memory. "Ev, storm's getting bad. We ought to bring the mustangs in." She nodded, snapping back to the present. They bundled up and trudged out into the storm, snow whipping their faces, boots crunching through drifts. The mustangs were jumpy, sensing the change. Evelyn moved slowly, speaking softly, calming the led mare with a touch and a whispered promise. Together, she and Jack led the herd into the barn, closing the heavy doors tight against the storm. Inside, Evelyn shivered, rubbing her hands together. "How long you think this'll last?" Jack shrugged. "Could be a couple days, maybe more." As they finished up, Jack glanced out a cracked window. "Ev, you see that?" She followed his gaze. Far across the snowy field, near the edge of her land, a dark truck idled, headlights off. The storm blurred its outline, but she could see it was there, watching. They froze, adrenaline surging. Evelyn's mind raced with possibilities, Abel or one of his men. She stepped closer to Jack, both of them peering into the swirling snow, neither willing to look away. "We lock everything?" she asked quietly. "Every damn thing," Jack replied. For a long time they watched the truck, neither speaking. Then, slowly, it turned and disappeared into the whiteout, leaving only a churned line in the snow. Evelyn exhaled, shoulders shaking. Jack pulled her inside, locking the door behind them. "He's testing us," he said, "seeing if we're scared." Evelyn met his gaze, defiance burning through the fear. "Let him look. I'm not running again." Outside, the storm howled, rattling every window and door. Inside, Evelyn and Jack stood together, hearts pounding, knowing the worst was still to come. Night fell hard and fast, swallowing the ranch in a hush broken only by the shriek of wind. The storm had slackened, but a heavy silence clung to everything. Evelyn moved through the house with a flashlight, checking each window and door, her hand lingering on the cold steel of the shotgun she kept within arm's reach. She didn't trust the quiet. She'd learned it was never a promise, only a pause before the next storm. She barely slept. Sometime after midnight, a sound snapped her awake. A crunch in the snow, faint but close, followed by the low murmur of voices drifting on the wind. She pressed her back to the bedroom wall, heart pounding, listening. The horses were restless in the barn, thumping against their stalls. Moonlight spilled across the frozen yard, painting every drift and post in cold silver. Evelyn slipped out of bed and pulled on her boots, moving with practiced silence. She flicked off the safety on her shotgun and crept down the hallway. Through the kitchen window, she caught a flash of movement. Two figures, hunched and bundled against the cold, slipping along the fence line near the corral. She hesitated, then slipped out the back door, careful not to let it slam. The air bit at her face, burning her lungs. She followed the shadows, breath held, boots crunching softly on the crusted snow. Jack's light flicked on in the bunkhouse. She signaled with her flashlight, and he joined her, his own rifle at the ready. They moved together, barely exchanging a word, an understanding built over long, lonely seasons. Jack nodded toward the corral, where fresh footprints marred the snow, leading right up to the wire. One section of fencing sagged, the top strand sliced clean. The mustangs inside were wild-eyed, nostrils flaring, coats dark with sweat despite the cold. "Damn it," Jack whispered. "They cut the wire." The horses began to spook, hooves clattering. One wild bay reared up, nearly clearing the fence before Evelyn darted forward, voice low and sure. "Easy, girl," she soothed, hands open, her body loose and calm. The mustang tossed her head. But Evelyn's presence settled her, and slowly the panic rippled out, the herd calming as she moved among them. It was a dance she knew by heart, one built on trust, pain, and patience. When she came back to Jack, his face was grim. He held out a slip of paper, found wedged in the fence. "Return what's mine, or face the law." AF, the threat burned in Evelyn's hands. "He's pushing me," she muttered, "trying to scare me into leaving." Jack's jaw tightened. "He wants you desperate. Wants you to make a mistake." They retreated to the house, barring the doors. Jack wanted to call Sheriff Monroe, but Evelyn hesitated. "He won't do much," she said. "Not unless there's blood in the snow. You know how folks talk. Abel's always known how to twist things his way. I don't trust the law out here to protect me." Jack sighed, understanding. "What about friends in town? Somebody has to believe you." Evelyn shook her head. "Not enough? Most see Abel as a wronged husband. They don't know what he's capable of." Jack pounded his fist lightly on the table, frustration etched in every line of his face. "You're not alone this time, Ev. I'll stand with you." Outside, the wind picked up again. The ranch felt smaller now, the safe routines stripped away. Evelyn checked the security cameras. 2 were blinking, but the others had gone dark, wires cut. She stared at the screens, jaw clenched. Abel's threats weren't empty. He was watching, waiting, always just out of reach. Jack busied himself barricading the windows and setting makeshift alarms, tripwires, old cans on strings, the sorts of tricks that might buy a few precious seconds if anyone tried to sneak up on them. He checked the rifles, cleaning and loading them with hands that barely trembled. Evelyn watched him work, grateful for his steadiness. Later, unable to sleep, she sat by the wood stove, staring into the flames. Her thoughts tangled with memories. Her escape from Abel, the battered women's shelter with its peeling walls and kind, tired faces. She remembered the way her hands shook when she signed her name on the intake forms, the way the other women looked at her, some with hope, others with haunted eyes. She'd learned how to listen, how to help, how to keep secrets safe. A sudden clang jolted her upright. Jack was already moving, shotgun in hand. They met at the back door, listening. From the shadows, a rock skittered across the porch, and then silence. Jack flicked on a floodlight, illuminating a fresh set of footprints, leading to the road, then vanishing. "Just another warning," Jack muttered. "Or a test." Evelyn bit her lip, determination flickering in her eyes. "He can test me all he wants. I'm not leaving." As dawn crept over the horizon, Evelyn and Jack checked the ranch again. They patched the fence, calmed the horses, collected the cut wire and torn paper, all evidence of the night's tension. The day broke clear but brittle. Every shadow stretched long and thin. When Jack suggested again that they call for help, Evelyn shook her head. If it comes to a fight, I want to know exactly who's on my side. And right now, that's you and me, and the horses. Jack gave her a lopsided grin. That's all we need then. Inside the house, Evelyn tucked the new threat away with the others, a growing pile that burned like coals in her desk drawer. She moved through her day with fresh resolve, every gesture edged with purpose. She was tired of running, tired of fear. The battle lines were drawn, and this time, she would not be the one to back down. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, carrying the promise of another night thick with shadows. Evelyn looked out at the horses in the corral, at Jack working in the yard, and at the endless stretch of Wyoming sky. She squared her shoulders, ready for whatever came next. The day that followed was bright but brittle, the air sharp and unforgiving. The wind swept clean across the plains, brushing the snow into glittering waves. Evelyn tried to sink into her chores, to lose herself in the familiar rhythm of ranch life, but her nerves thrummed with dread. Every distant engine noise made her freeze. Every shadow at the edge of the property felt like it was watching. Jack spent the day fortifying the house and barn, moving supplies into safer rooms, and checking every window latch and door hinge twice. They barely spoke. There was little to say that hadn't already been spoken in the tight language of fear and readiness. Evelyn found herself checking her phone every half hour, the screen blank and silent. Twilight came fast. It draped the ranch in long blue shadows, the kind that made a person's heart beat a little harder. Evelyn stood at the window, shotgun in hand, and watched the snow glow lavender under the fading sun. The horses were restless, circling in the corral, and even the barn cats had vanished. A sudden roar cut through the quiet, a truck engine, powerful and unhurried. Evelyn's stomach dropped. Jack met her in the kitchen, rifle in hand, his face pale but determined. The headlights swung around the bend in the driveway, blinding in the gloom. Not one vehicle, but two. A battered old Dodge with a cracked windshield in front, followed by a black pickup with tires big enough to flatten barbed wire. The trucks rolled to a stop in the drive, engines idling. The doors creaked open, and three men stepped into the twilight, Abel Ford leading the way. Even at a distance, Evelyn recognized his walk. He moved like he owned the world, chin high, a sneer already curling his lips. He wore a battered brown duster and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, but there was no hiding the cruel set of his mouth or the cold glint in his eyes. Two men flanked him, both burly, with heavy coats and rifles slung carelessly. Strangers, but cut from the same hard cloth as Abel. They scanned the ranch, their movements casual, almost bored. Abel's voice boomed across the yard. "Evenin', Evelyn! Jack! I'm here for what's mine!" Evelyn's heart pounded, but she forced herself to keep her voice steady. "You've got no right to be here, Abel. Leave now, or I'll call the sheriff." Abel laughed, slow and mocking. "Already did, darlin'. Man's a half hour out, maybe more. But don't worry. We'll handle this ourselves." Jack stepped onto the porch, rifle leveled. "That's far enough, Abel. You cross this line, I swear." Abel cut him off with a gesture. "You really want to shoot out in front of the lady? Or those pretty horses?" The wind howled. For a moment, all four men stared at one another. The tension stretched tighter than a wire fence. Then, one of Abel's men edged forward, testing the boundary. Jack fired a warning shot into the air. The crack of the rifle echoed off the bluffs, sending the horses into a frenzy. The intruders hesitated, but Abel only smiled wider. "Go on, Jack. Show me you've got the guts. Or maybe Evelyn wants to do it herself." Evelyn gripped her shotgun. She could see the madness in Abel's eyes. He wasn't just here to scare her. He wanted to reclaim the life he'd lost, to show everyone he still had power. The second man moved for the barn, thinking to circle around. Evelyn darted through the shadows, heart racing, and slipped inside before him. She crouched by the stalls, shotgun cocked. The man kicked open the barn door, rifle raised. She waited, steady as a coiled spring. When he stepped too far inside, she fired into the rafters above his head. Splinters rained down, and he ducked, cursing, as a spooked mustang bucked and knocked him off his feet. The man scrambled out, trailing blood from a cut on his forehead, abandoning his rifle. Outside, Jack and Abel squared off in the snow. Abel tried to rush him, but Jack, a combat veteran, anticipated the move and swept Abel's legs out from under him with a shovel. The third man hesitated, then bolted for the truck, slipping in the snow. Jack kept his rifle leveled at Abel, who spat blood and cursed. "You'll pay for this, Jack. You think the law's on your side?" "The law's on the side of what's right," Jack shot back, his voice steady. "And you crossed a line." Evelyn emerged from the barn, covered in dust and shaking but unbroken. She pointed her shotgun at Abel's wounded man, who was clutching his head. "You need a doctor," she said, voice hard. "But you're not getting help here." The men retreated to their trucks, dragging the injured one with them. But one, hurt worse than the others, collapsed by the gate, unable to run. Jack kept his gun trained on him until the sheriff's headlights swept up the driveway. Sheriff Monroe stepped out, eyes wide at the chaos. What the hell happened here? Abel tried to spin the story, claiming Evelyn had attacked him on his own property, but Jack and Evelyn were quick to speak. The sheriff saw the cut wire, the battered door, and the injured man, and his skepticism faded. For the first time, Evelyn saw fear flicker in Abel's eyes, just a flash, but enough. "I'll need statements from all of you," Monroe said. "And Abel, you're not leaving town." The threat lingered in the air. But as the sheriff took the wounded man into custody, Evelyn felt a fierce, battered pride. She was still here. She had fought back. As Monroe drove away, Jack squeezed her shoulder. "You did good, Ev." Evelyn nodded, her voice rough with exhaustion and relief. "I'm done running, Jack. If Abel wants a war, he's got one." The night closed in, heavy and dark, but Evelyn Harper stood at the heart of it, unbroken, unbowed, and ready for the next fight. The morning after the attack dawned gray and brittle. Evelyn barely slept, haunted by flashes of the night before. Abel's sneering face, the panic of the horses, the shotgun blast ringing in her ears. But there was no time to collapse. The world and the fight moved on. By midday, rumors spread across the plains like wildfire. Some neighbors drove by slow, windows cracked, watching the ranch as if it were a crime scene or a circus. Others called to offer cautious support, their voices hushed, afraid to get involved. Evelyn's phone buzzed with messages, some kind, most full of suspicion. In the distance, Jack was in the corral, checking on the mustangs, jaw set, refusing to let the fear show. That afternoon, a different sort of threat arrived. A black SUV, gleaming and dustless, crunched up the drive and stopped near the front porch. Two men stepped out, one a lawyer in a crisp suit, the other a county official with a stack of documents. Abel wasn't far behind. His face wrapped in bandages, swaggering with a false bravado. Jack came in from the yard, rifle slung over his shoulder. Evelyn stood at the top of the steps, arms crossed, every inch the lady of the house. The lawyer flashed a white-toothed smile and handed her an envelope. "Miss Harper, my client has legal business to discuss. Would you be so kind as to join us?" Evelyn opened the envelope and skimmed the first page. Her stomach clenched. It was a deed. Abel's name newly scribbled on the line next to hers. The lawyer's voice was smooth as oil. "According to Wyoming's old homestead statutes and with recent documentation, Mr. Ford remains entitled to this property as your legal husband. These filings give him full claim, unless you vacate voluntarily." Abel grinned, eyes glittering. "You can pack up, or we can have the sheriff do it for you." Rage and disbelief warred in Evelyn's chest. "You think some piece of paper can undo what you did to me? This ranch is my home. I won't leave." The lawyer just shrugged, already turning back to the SUV. "You'll be hearing from the court soon, Miss Harper. I'd advise you to get your affairs in order." When they were gone, Evelyn threw the envelope into the fire, hands shaking. "They can try all they want," she whispered, "but I won't be run off." Jack sat across from her, elbows on his knees. "We need help, Ev. This is bigger than the two of us." She nodded. "Let's call in everyone who owes me a favor." Word went out to the women Evelyn had helped over the years, those she'd counseled, sheltered, or simply listened to. By dusk, they started to arrive. Battered, brave, and fiercely loyal. Some came with children in tow. Others came alone, eyes hard and jaws set. They gathered in Evelyn's kitchen, a circle of quiet determination. One by one, they told their stories, of running, of hiding, of starting over. They spoke of Evelyn as a friend, a savior, and a stubborn protector. Each testimony added weight to the cause. Jack moved among them, offering coffee and nods of encouragement. The house, once a fortress of isolation, began to feel like something new, a haven. The sheriff, under pressure from both the town and Abel's well-paid attorney, stopped by again that evening. He stood in the doorway, hat in hand. "Evelyn, I need your side of all this. The court's going to want to see you next week. There's people in town saying all sorts of things." Evelyn met his gaze, unflinching. "What do you believe, Ed?" The sheriff shifted, uncomfortable. "I believe there's more to the story than some folks care to admit. But Abel's lawyer's making noise, talking about lost property, spousal rights, and old injuries. Public opinion's split. Half the town thinks you're standing up for yourself. The other half, well, you know how it goes." Evelyn nodded, jaw tight. "I'll be ready for court." Jack stepped forward. "Sheriff, if you want the real story, talk to these women. Hear what they have to say about Abel, about this place." Monroe looked around the room at the gathering of women, each one marked by pain but unbroken. He nodded slowly. "All right, I'll listen." Days passed, each one more tense than the last. Word got out that Evelyn's home was a sanctuary for women escaping violence. Some locals were angry, fearing trouble or scandal. Others showed up at the gate with casseroles and letters of support. A news van parked down the road, a reporter angling for a story. Abel, furious at losing control, sent more threats. Anonymous calls came at all hours. Some nights, rocks hit the windows. Still, the women stayed. They patched fences, cooked together, watched over the mustangs. Laughter began to bubble up in the kitchen, tentative but real. For the first time in a long time, Evelyn saw hope flicker in the faces around her. Jack became the unofficial marshal of Harper Ranch, organizing patrols and standing watch with other allies. Ranchers, a school teacher, even the grizzled owner of the feed store. Each night, they took turns keeping the property safe. Community lines were being drawn, sides chosen. In the midst of it all, Evelyn remembered what courage looked like. Not the kind that came with guns and standoffs, but the quieter kind. The courage to trust, to hope, to open the doors of her home to others who needed shelter. By week's end, Evelyn's house was more than a fortress. It was a beacon. The battle for the ranch was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone who'd ever fought to escape the dark. And deep down, Evelyn knew, if Abel wanted to come for her again, he'd find the whole of Harper Ranch standing in his way. The early March wind howled around Harper Ranch, rattling the shutters and carrying the smell of coming snow. Tension sat thick in the air, pressing down on everyone inside the old house. Evelyn had barely slept in days. Her nerves were frayed, her patience worn thin. She checked the windows twice each night, walking the halls with her shotgun, always listening for the faintest scrape or whisper outside. Inside, the once quiet rooms buzzed with anxious activity. Jack was up before dawn, coordinating with the women and neighbors who'd come to help defend the ranch. They took shifts on the porch and at the barn, always armed, always watching. Evelyn saw the way Jack moved, wary but determined, a steady anchor in the growing storm. Each morning, new threats appeared, dead snakes nailed to the fence posts, messages painted in red across the barn doors. Run while you can, and she doesn't belong here. The mustangs were restless, crowding the far side of the corral, wild eyes shining in the half-light. On the third night after the court documents arrived, Evelyn spotted headlights bobbing down the distant county road, more than a dozen, moving slow, their beams sweeping the frozen prairie. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She hurried to the front room, where Jack and 3 other ranchers, friends of her late husband, were already loading rifles. "They're here," she said quietly. Jack looked her in the eye, jaw set. "We hold the line, Ev. No one comes through that gate." A convoy of trucks pulled up just outside the fence. Men poured out. Some masked, some swaggering openly, rifles slung and flashlights bobbing. At their center stood Abel Ford, coat flapping in the wind, eyes blazing with rage and triumph. He shouted over the hood of his truck, voice carrying across the snow. "You've got one last chance, Evelyn. Get out, or we're coming in." Evelyn's breath clouded in the cold. She stepped outside, shotgun cradled in her arms, Jack right behind her. The porch light flickered overhead, throwing their shadows long and sharp. "You don't own this place anymore, Abel. You never did," she shouted back, voice steady and strong. A ripple of nervous laughter ran through Abel's men. Someone fired a warning shot into the sky. Horses whinnied and stomped in the corral, panic spreading through the herd. Jack lifted his rifle, scanning the line of intruders. "Nobody wants bloodshed tonight. Turn around and go home." But Abel was past reasoning. He waved a sheaf of papers, legal documents, probably for show, and gestured his men forward. "If you won't leave, we'll throw you out. Boys, move in!" Suddenly, gunfire exploded across the yard. Evelyn dropped to the porch, adrenaline roaring through her. Jack and the others fired back, aiming high, trying to drive the men back without killing anyone. The air crackled with bullets. Glass shattered. Horses screamed. In the chaos, one of the women, Martha, a tough former schoolteacher, dashed from the barn, waving a lantern. "They're trying to cut through the back fence," she yelled. Evelyn and two of her allies raced for the rear corral, weaving between outbuildings as bullets pinged off the tin roof. Abel's men had started to split up, circling like wolves, looking for a weak spot. At the back of the property, the mustangs kicked and charged, spooked by the noise. Evelyn reached the fence just as a masked man slipped through a hole in the wire, knife gleaming. She didn't hesitate, leveled her shotgun, and fired a blast into the air. The man dove back, cursing, as another defender came up behind him with a pitchfork. All at once, the horses surged. Whether from fear or freedom, a group of mustangs charged the gap in the fence and broke through, thundering into the melee. Men scattered, some leaping out of the way, others dropping weapons in panic. Hooves flashed and snow flew. Evelyn grabbed the reins of the lead mare, whispering calm into the animal's ear, trying to herd the mustangs away from the fighting. Jack joined her, hands bloody from a grazing bullet, but eyes sharp. "They're breaking!" he shouted, pointing as Abel's line began to falter. Abel, wild-eyed and desperate, stormed forward with two of his men. He raised his pistol, firing blindly at the porch. Evelyn turned, adrenaline burning, and faced him head-on. "Enough!" she screamed, her voice echoing across the yard. Abel charged, gun raised. Time seemed to slow. Jack yelled her name. Martha screamed. Evelyn lifted her shotgun, heart pounding, and fired. Abel dropped to his knees, pistol falling from numb fingers, a look of shock crossing his face. The blast hadn't killed him, but it tore through his shoulder, spinning him to the frozen ground. His men froze, suddenly leaderless. Jack ran to Evelyn's side, covering her as the last of Abel's men threw down their weapons and fled. The gunfire faded, replaced by the thunder of hooves and the ragged sound of Evelyn's breathing. Sirens wailed in the distance. The sheriff's deputies arrived minutes later, floodlights sweeping the chaos. Abandoned guns, broken fences, frightened women and children clinging to one another. The law, for once, had arrived in time. Evelyn collapsed against Jack, sobbing with relief and exhaustion. The ranch was battered, but still standing. She looked down at Abel, defeated, cuffed, and bleeding in the snow. "This is over," she whispered, though deep inside she knew the battle had only changed shape. The siege had ended, but the war for her future, her name, her freedom, was only beginning. Morning found Harper Ranch in pieces. The yard was littered with broken glass, splintered boards, and empty shell casings half buried in the churned snow. The mustangs milled nervously near the far fence line, sides heaving and eyes wild, some with blood-flecked flanks from minor scrapes and panic. Inside the battered house, Evelyn moved like a ghost, adrenaline gone, every step weighed down by exhaustion and the ache of wounds, some old, some new. Jack sat at the kitchen table, his arm wrapped in a makeshift bandage. Martha and the other women huddled together, eyes red from crying, children clinging to their skirts. For the first time in days, no one was speaking. Outside, the law had taken over. Deputies stringing yellow tape across the drive, a deputy sheriff snapping photos, a crime scene tech dusting for fingerprints in the hallway. Abel lay in the hospital under guard, his shoulder wound, cleaned and bound. His lawyer had arrived before dawn, already firing off calls to the press and demanding his client's immediate release. He called the siege an ambush and Evelyn an unstable, dangerous woman. By breakfast, a news van idled at the edge of the property, cameras aimed at the ruined ranch house, ready to broadcast every rumor. Evelyn poured coffee with shaking hands. She'd never wanted to be a symbol, but now the whole county was watching. Some to judge, some to help, most to gawk. Every knock at the door made her flinch. When the sheriff arrived mid-morning, she met him at the porch, arms folded tightly across her chest. Sheriff Monroe's face was grim, his hat in his hands. "Evelyn, I've got to take your statement and—" He paused, swallowing. "Abel's attorney is pressing charges. They're calling it attempted murder and aggravated assault." For a long moment, Evelyn said nothing. The yard spun slowly, the horizon blurring. "He came here to kill me, Ed. You saw what happened." Monroe nodded. "I know what I saw, but the law's the law. His people say he was just trying to reclaim his property. They've got papers and witnesses saying you shot him in cold blood." Jack appeared behind her, voice fierce. "She defended herself, defended all of us. If you lock her up and let Abel walk, there'll be hell to pay in this town." Monroe sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'm not happy about it, Jack, but the district attorney's making this political. The whole county's watching, and the governor's office wants a full investigation. I'm sorry, Evelyn. I have to take you in." Evelyn nodded, face stone still. "Let me say goodbye." She walked inside, gathering the women in the living room. Some of them were shaking, others openly weeping. Evelyn looked each in the eye. "They're going to try to use this against us, but we know the truth. Stick together. Don't let them scare you." The women hugged her, Martha gripping her hands tight. "We'll get you out, Evelyn. We'll make them listen." Outside, the deputies cuffed her gently, as if apologizing for the law itself. Jack stood by, rage and worry carving deep lines in his face. As the squad car drove away, the news van followed, cameras rolling. By nightfall, Evelyn's mugshot was splashed across local news. "Widow of Harper Ranch arrested in shooting." The phone at the ranch rang all night, some calls full of hate and blame, others offering support, confusion, or simply the echo of fear. In jail, Evelyn spent her first night in a cold cell, sleep coming in brief, shuddering fits. She relived the siege, every gunshot and scream, Abel's face twisted with pain and hatred. She heard the voices of neighbors, their gossip laced with suspicion. She was always awed, always kept to herself. Who knows what really happened out there? The weight of other women's stories pressed in on her. How quickly the world turned against survivors. How easily victims became suspects. Her court-appointed attorney met her the next morning, briefcase full of folders and worry. "The prosecution's painting you as a vigilante, Evelyn. They say you could have run, that you shot Abel out of revenge." Evelyn's jaw clenched. "If I'd run, we'd all be dead. The only reason anyone's alive is because we fought back." The attorney nodded. "We'll need to prove it. The DA is calling this a stand-your-ground case, but the pressure is intense. Public opinion is split. We have to find character witnesses, evidence of the abuse, anything to show your side." Evelyn thought of the pile of threatening letters, the cut fences, the battered women gathered in her kitchen. "Get them all here," she said. "Let every woman I've ever helped speak for me." Meanwhile, Jack worked the phones from the ranch. He called every ally, every woman who had ever stayed under Evelyn's roof, every old friend from her late husband's life. The women rallied, collecting their own statements, photos, and bruises, assembling a binder of evidence. They knocked on doors across town, challenging neighbors who spread rumors and shamed them for their scars. In town, opinion was divided. Some said Evelyn was a hero. the only one willing to stand up to Abel and his bullies. Others called her a menace, a crazy widow who'd turned the ranch into a war zone. A handful of men from Abel's circle gave interviews, saying she'd stolen the property, that she provoked good men. But slowly, something shifted. A trickle of support, then a flood. Women who'd never spoken before came forward, telling their stories to the press, to the sheriff, to the DA. As Evelyn's first court date approached, Jack visited her in the jail, pressing her hands through the bars. "We're with you, Ev. The truth will come out. You're not alone. Not anymore." Evelyn nodded, heart swelling with gratitude and fear. The war for her freedom was just beginning, but she wasn't facing it in silence. This time, the world would hear her voice, and the voices of every woman who refused to be pushed back into the dark. The county courthouse was an old red brick relic, its clock tower looming over the square like a silent judge. On the morning of Evelyn Harper's trial, a cold wind swept Main Street, tugging at the coats of townsfolk gathered outside, drawn by rumor, curiosity, or support. News crews clustered on the courthouse steps, their microphones angled toward the doors, hungry for sound bites. Inside, the main courtroom buzzed with uneasy tension. Evelyn sat at the defense table, hands folded tight in her lap. Her face was drawn but resolute, her eyes tracing the grain of the wooden table, every knot and groove a reminder of her life's hard edges. Beside her, her attorney shuffled notes and glanced at the growing crowd. Jack sat in the front row, his arm in a sling, flanked by a half-dozen women from the ranch and town, each a quiet pillar of solidarity. Abel Ford entered with his lawyer and a small knot of supporters, men in pressed shirts, faces hard and set. Abel's shoulder was bound, but his expression was full of spite, as if every moment of Evelyn's suffering was a victory in his mind. The judge, a stern woman with a sharp jaw and eyes that missed little, called the courtroom to order. The DA launched straight into the state's case, painting Evelyn as an unstable vigilante who'd escalated a property dispute into a firefight. The defendant, he intoned, chose violence when she could have chosen to walk away. Evelyn listened, jaw clenched, as he recounted the night in cold, clinical terms, glossing over Abel's threats, the siege, the terror. Her attorney stood to counter. This case is about survival, about a woman who defended her home, her friends, her very life, about years of abuse no lawman would stop. He called his first witness, Evelyn herself. The bailiff swore her in. Evelyn took the stand, heart pounding so hard she thought it might drown out her voice. For a moment, she stared out over the room, the judge, the jury, the crowd, the news cameras, and saw not just faces, but all the silent years, the pain she'd swallowed. She drew a slow breath and began. She told them about her first years with Abel, the charm, the small-town wedding, the subtle isolations. She spoke of bruises covered with long sleeves, of broken ribs and broken promises, of the night he locked her in the tack room with a shackle meant for mustangs. She explained the limp, the scars, the sleepless years spent listening for his truck. Even after she'd escaped, she recounted how he'd found her here, how the threats started, the notes, the cut fences, the terror that grew until she had no choice but to fight back or die. The DA tried to cut her down. "Why didn't you call the police sooner?" he demanded. "Why didn't you leave town altogether?" Evelyn looked him square in the eye. "Because I shouldn't have to run, because this is my home, and because every time I called for help, no one came. Women like me, like us, get told to keep quiet or move along. But I did everything I could to protect myself and everyone under my roof. Her voice broke, but she didn't look away. In the silence, a woman in the gallery stood up, a battered woman Evelyn had once helped escape. "She saved my life," the woman said, voice clear. "If not for her, I'd still be hiding, or dead." The judge ordered quiet, but something had shifted. One by one, women rose from their seats. Some from town, some from nearby ranches, a few strangers whose names Evelyn had never known. Each testified, sometimes with trembling voices, about nights spent hiding at Harper Ranch, about food and safety, about how the sheriff or pastor or neighbors had looked the other way, while Abel and men like him prowled the countryside. Jack was called to the stand, his voice hoarse but unflinching. He recounted the night of the siege, the gunfire, the moments when Evelyn risked her own life to protect everyone else. "If not for Evelyn, half of us wouldn't be here," he said, staring at the jury. "She stood up when the law wouldn't." The sheriff took the stand, torn but honest. He admitted the old biases, the pressure from powerful men like Abel, the slow pace of real justice in places like this. "We let her down," Monroe said, his voice gruff. "We let a lot of women down. That ends now." The prosecutor tried to regain control, grilling Evelyn about her past, her supposed anger, her unladylike stubbornness. But each question seemed to strengthen her resolve, and the resolve of the women watching her. By the end of her testimony, Evelyn was exhausted but defiant, her story laid bare for all to see. The defense called witnesses. Martha and the other women, neighbors who'd seen the threats, even the town's feed store owner who vouched for Evelyn's character. A few men from Abel's circle tried to paint her as a troublemaker, but their words rang hollow against the tide of testimony. Public sentiment shifted visibly in the packed room. The courtroom became a reckoning, not just for Evelyn, but for the whole community. The judge looked down from the bench, the weight of generations of silence and pain pressing on her gavel. In closing arguments, Evelyn's attorney reminded the jury that justice wasn't always about who shouted the loudest or who had the fanciest lawyer. Sometimes it was about who finally had the courage to speak. As the jury left to deliberate, Evelyn returned to the defense table, head high, hands no longer shaking. Jack squeezed her shoulder. Across the aisle, Abel glared, but there was no triumph left in his eyes, only the cold, small fear of a man who'd lost control. All that remained was the verdict, and whatever future it would bring. The jury deliberated for hours. Evelyn sat in the hallway, staring out a high courthouse window as dusk painted long golden streaks across Main Street. Her hands trembled with fatigue and hope. Jack waited beside her, his arm still in a sling, his other hand wrapped firmly around hers. Martha sat nearby, holding a battered purse full of letters and notes from all the women Evelyn had ever helped. The old courthouse buzzed with whispers, reporters murmuring, friends and strangers crowding the corridor in uneasy anticipation. When the bailiff finally opened the doors, Evelyn's heart nearly stopped. People pressed in behind her as she walked into the courtroom, each step heavy with memories, the crack of gunfire, Abel's hate-filled eyes, the faces of battered women whose stories had always seemed to vanish in silence. Now, for once, the whole town was watching. The judge nodded solemnly at the jury. The foreman, a weathered rancher with tired eyes, stood and cleared his throat. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Evelyn Harper, not guilty on all charges." A hush fell, then a rush of relief. Gasps, sobs, cheers. Evelyn felt her knees buckle. Jack caught her, tears bright in his eyes. Martha hugged her hard, laughter and weeping mingling. The women from the ranch, her sisters, her allies, surged forward, enveloping her in a fierce embrace. Judge Wallace's gavel rang for silence. This court recognizes Evelyn Harper as a survivor, not a criminal. The evidence of abuse, the testimony of so many, make it clear what happened at Harper Ranch was not an act of vengeance, but of desperate courage. Ms. Harper, this court thanks you for your bravery. The courtroom emptied into the street, where the sun was setting in a blaze of red and gold. Reporters crowded close, microphones thrust forward, but Jack shielded Evelyn as best he could. News spread fast. The battered widow of Harper Ranch was free. Rumors and judgment faded as facts took root. People who doubted her now reached out to shake her hand. The sheriff offered a stiff, sincere apology, promising to change how his office handled domestic violence from now on. But even with justice served, the wounds ran deep. Harper Ranch was still battered and broken, windows shattered, fences torn, horses jittery and thin. For days after the verdict, Evelyn found herself wandering the property in a daze, feeling the weight of every scar and every empty room. The kitchen table was crowded each morning with letters, thanks from women she'd never met, requests for help, offers of support from distant towns and cities. One note read simply, "Because of you, I believe it can get better." Jack and Martha rallied the women to repair what they could. The house was scrubbed, the porch rebuilt, the corral mended, the mustangs brushed and gentled until their panic faded. Old friends sent lumber, food, and money. One morning, a crew of volunteers arrived. Some were the same deputies who'd once doubted her. Together, they built a new bunkhouse and expanded the barn, making space for women and children seeking shelter. Evelyn found herself leading by example, guiding, comforting, teaching new hands how to care for horses and patch fences. As spring greened the hills, Harper Ranch changed. It became a sanctuary, not just for wild mustangs, but for anyone who needed refuge. Survivors came from as far as Colorado and Nebraska, women and kids battered by fate, arriving with bruised hope. There were tears and flashbacks, but also laughter. The ranch kitchen was full every night. Shared stories, quiet understanding, and meals cooked with the joy of people who'd survived together. Jack stayed. He and Evelyn rebuilt their friendship, tending the land and the horses side by side. Their feelings grew quietly, like the grass after rain, rooted in respect, trust, and hard-earned healing. He never rushed her. They walked at her pace. Some evenings, after the chores were done, they sat together on the porch, watching the mustangs run beneath the wide Wyoming sky, their hands entwined, saying nothing and everything. Evelyn found her purpose growing larger than her pain. She set up a formal Mustang rescue, inviting survivors to work with the horses, learning trust and strength alongside the wild creatures. The program brought new hope. Some women found peace in the rhythm of brushing coats and mending harnesses. Others discovered courage in the thunder of hooves and the patient process of earning a Mustang's trust. Thank you letters poured in from across the West. Former guests wrote about new jobs, new homes, lives reclaimed. Donations arrived, enough to keep the ranch running, enough to build a playground for the children and a garden for all to share. Evelyn's story was written up in national papers, the ranch hailed as a beacon for women seeking safety and a new start. One day, as the sky blazed blue and wildflowers bloomed along the creek, Evelyn saddled her favorite Mustang and rode out to the far ridge. Jack and a dozen women, old friends and newcomers alike, joined her. Together, they galloped across the open plains, their laughter carried on the wind, no longer running from the past, but charging into a future they'd forged themselves. On the high ground, they paused. Evelyn looked back at the house, a place reborn, and at the faces around her, each marked by struggle and triumph. She felt no fear, only gratitude. She raised her hand, waving to the women behind her. "This is just the beginning," she called. "We ride for hope, for change, for every woman who needs a place to start again." As the sun set, Evelyn led her new family home, no longer a widow hiding behind locked doors, but a leader, strong, free, unbroken. The mustangs ran beside them, wild and untamed as the wind. And for the first time in her life, Evelyn Harper knew she was exactly where she belonged.